Thank you, Dennis. My name is Justin Onuekwusi, as Dennis mentioned. Great to be back again. Head of Retail Multi-Asset Funds at Legal and General Investment Management and a fund manager. Gavin Lewis, Managing Director at BlackRock for LGPS, Local Government Pension Schemes. BlackRock, one of the largest asset managers in the world. Previously, he's been at Vanguard, UBS, Russell, as Head of Consulting Relationships, Head of Institutional Sales. The list goes on and on and on. And then finally, last but not least, the COO of listed equities at boutique and environmental specialist Impact Asset Management, Darren Johnson, one of the very few ethnic minorities to be on the C-suite in the asset management industry, and one of only two, I believe, black people to be on the C-suite in the asset management industry. So absolutely incredible panel, and already I can see some feedback from some of the audience already. So what I want to do is get to the questions from the audience, but I've got a few questions first. Please fire them through as they come to your mind, because I'll write them down as we go through. So firstly, I thought, we'll start with an icebreaker. Office politics is the title of this discussion, and it's obviously quite a broad term. But what does office politics mean to you? Shall we start with Darren?
Hey.
I think you're on mute.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you, Darren.
Right, great. Thank you. So thanks for the introduction. So what does office politics mean?
Darren, I can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Sorry, hold on. So Gavin, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Darren.
Anji, you can hear me? So
yeah, I can hear you.
Can everyone else hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you as well.
Okay, great. So I think it might be Justin.
All right. Can't hear
Okay, great. So I'll start anyway. I'm sure he'll catch up. So I guess office politics is part of any business environment. I guess organizations are political by their very nature. If you think about an organization, you've always got people with diverse perspectives. You've got teams that depend on each other in the interdependencies. And you also typically have scarce resources. You have unclear job definitions, and then you do have some people with some emotional insecurity issues. I'm sure a lot can relate, and a lack of EI as well, emotional intelligence. But I also think it means that, it's about having power, but actually more importantly, it's also about being powerless as well. Powerlessness corrupts as much as power. If you not perceive yourself to have power, then sometimes you can't stand up to what you believe in. So there are loads of factors, and I guess some people see it negatively. There are positives to office politics as well. You can use it to help you achieve your career goals. Some people do use office politics as a way to vent frustrations about lack of progress. But you can do much more than you think. So I don't know if you want to go, Gavin. Justin can't hear.
So I can't hear, but I'll pass on to. I can see you stop talking, Darren. So I'll pass on to Anji and then to Gavin, and I will log back in.
Thanks.
Anji, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. So office politics. So I agree with everything Darren said. I think there's a couple of things for me. Office politics can be seen as the negative, and I think that really is more to do whether the culture of the firm and how those office politics play out at the firm. In my view, office politics is about just the human interactions within the firm, and if they are negative and perceived negatively, then I think that is derived from the culture of the firm. However, office politics can really be your way to influence the power, the authority of the organization, to help for you to get the constructive feedback from people outside of your own team, your own management line, to help you drive change for yourself and gain more, what would I say, advocates at the firm for you and in your role. That network that you build can really be a change initiator in the organization, not just for your own career, but maybe that of your team and what you're trying to produce. I personally see, office politics, and maybe it's the terminology, as a positive and something that you can really use to negotiate your career and your position at the firm. I think when it becomes toxic, that really is a derivative of the firm's culture itself. So the leadership of the firm, and if they build this kind of networking organization, also known as office politics, in a positive way, I think it can become highly influential to your career and how you navigate the firm. I'll hand over to Gavin.
Yeah, so why don't I give a personal perspective, because I think Anji and Darren have summed things up quite succinctly. So certainly early on in my career, I tried to shy away or avoid office politics. Basically, because when I entered the workplace, my primary aim was to progress my career and entering into, let's just focus on the negative side of office politics, but conflict with other people is something that I try to avoid. It's one thing. The second thing is I did actually see people who were very, very good at politicking, if that's the right way to put it, progress quite quickly in their careers. And often it was always amazing to me because they wouldn't necessarily be the best at their jobs, but they were very, very good at managing internal relationships. And I saw them go and progress much quicker than I did. And I would sit there lamenting, like, I'm doing a better job, and why is that person progressing quicker? But so I think Anji and Darren are right. Actually, whether you like it or not, it's part and parcel of the workplace, and you need to choose how you interact with it. On occasion, you might need to politic because that's the culture of the environment in which you're working, and that is how one might progress. An example might be that you may never come into conflict with anyone, and I'll just come into what conflict means. You may never come into conflict with anyone, but then the question which may be held over you may be, well, actually, does this person actually know how to manage his or her stakeholders? Does this person know how to manage difficult personalities? So I think we have to accept that it is something which is innate in most organizations. I mean, a wise person said to me that all you need for politics is more than one person in a room. But it really depends on how you choose to utilize it. If you go in with positive intentions, it may be that those are the machinations of the firm and the business. So, yeah, I would say that think differently, and maybe the term that we're using, office politics, is not the right one. It might just be, how do you manage your relationships internally, and how do you manage good relationships, and how do you manage difficult relationships? It's probably a better way to think about it.
Yeah, no, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's great. I've moved on to another phone. So I missed most of the answers, which is great. But yeah, I suppose moving on to a question that I had really, and it's around this belief that hard work can get you to the top, and hard work can get you to achieve. And as ethnic minorities, I think we've all kind of heard the term work twice as hard to get half as much, and our parents instill into us the importance of hard work. But I just wonder, in the workplace, is there more than just hard work when it comes to getting to the top? Many people I speak to, think that working, outside of your day-to-day job is playing the game. Is there a counter argument that office politics is actually confused with softer skills? Anji, do you want to take this one first?
Sure. And it's interesting because I can see people wanting to hear about, personal, situations and experiences that we've had in our career. So I think, if I put this into context, so I definitely, coming from an Indian background, had parents who were very committed to, you work hard and you will be rewarded. And I think, fundamentally, to excel at your job, you have to do a good job. That's table stakes. Now, what comes after that in terms of promotion, how quickly that's expedited, pay, I think really that is, maybe you just called it softer skills, Justin, and I think Gavin called it, this kind of relationship and networking at the firm, or a la office politics. So personally, I started my career by just working very hard. And I think in your early career, that's a good place to start. And then, as I wanted to take on more management responsibilities, which weren't aligned necessarily to the day job, I think speaking up at the firm, taking on extras outside of what I was doing, stretch opportunities, but then also building a cohort, maybe within that office politics spectrum, of advocates, advisors, people who would give me constructive feedback, not negative feedback. It's great, positive feedback makes us feel really good. Constructive feedback actually makes us better and gets us further, because we may not always be sure how our behaviors and how what we say and our intentions show up. Perception is very different to intention. And I've learned that the really hard way during my career. I think I wanted to remain authentic to who I am. I was brought up with certain values, virtues, ethics, which I wanted to be aligned to how I navigated my career, and they have been. But at the same time, I think knowing who to trust, knowing how to build your network is something that takes time during your career. My biggest advice is, if you're not prepared to say something to somebody's face directly, I would never say it to somebody else. There's a very real difference between gossip and also office politics. And I think, where I've been caught out in my career is maybe sometimes not going directly to somebody with feedback or my advice or my perceptions, and going to somebody else. So I think speaking up to those individuals is a better way to do that. In terms of softer skills, I think navigating and being true to who you are and speaking up directly, and also being very clear about your ambitions. I think that is, you need to do that. Otherwise, as somebody in HR once told me, and a senior manager at my firm, we don't know what you want unless you tell us. Like, we can guess, but we also don't know how quickly you want it. So, it was really important for me to be a member of the EMEA Management Committee and a managing director at the firm. And when I spoke up about that, a lot of people were able to give me the advice I needed and the feedback I needed to be able to get there quicker than maybe I would have been able to without them, without saying that to them. And I was put on the EMEA Management Committee 6 months later. So I think those things do make a difference.
Yep. Darren, do you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, sure. I completely agree with Anji. So for me, my own experience is yes. I definitely agree on the perception of working hard. I was very perception, actually the reality of working hard. I guess for me, in coming up in my career, I've always kind of had a mantra that I was told quite early on to really try and overwhelm people with my ability. And try to basically trying to underpromise and overdeliver. So I've always had that, and I've also had a lot of emotional intelligence in the sense that, and I was going to talk about this later, but in terms of understanding what success looks like, not what my success looks like, but what success looks like from the eyes of my boss. Understanding, what makes them tick, what they want, how do I make them look good. All of these types of things kind of help me to progress in my career. Working hard, because you can work hard and get nowhere, right? And this maybe goes back to playing politics well, but trying to understand the mission statement of the business. What is the business trying to achieve? What's the culture of the business? How can I deliver in a way that's aligned to the culture of the organization? These are all things that I did, I guess, to help me. Also feedback. So again, you need to be strong at taking feedback, and you need to be willing to act on it. Even if no one's told you something before, you need to be able to self-reflect on yourself. And when I was younger, I thought I knew everything. I thought the way I operated was perfect, and I could not see any issue with myself. And I worked really hard, and everyone used to say, good job, Darren, you worked really hard. But what I didn't realize was that the stuff that I was doing, my managers at the time didn't hit their radar, because it didn't mean anything to their day jobs, really. I was just producing or doing tasks. And then once I figured out that, listen, you need to be more effective in a way that you're making your bosses look good, you're doing what they deem as successful. Once I started to do that, then I started to climbing. I started to build relationships as well. It's really, really important to build relationships. So when you look at relationships, there's different types of relationships. You have your operational relationships. So that means working with other teams, trying to find out who the key people in other teams are that can help you deliver what you need to deliver to make your boss happy. But also strategic relationships. So the people that I need to speak to that know what's going on in the business, know where the opportunities lie, know where I can help and go, and where I can even ask for suggestions, and kind of implementing all of those things, I guess, help me. And I guess maybe it's playing the game. Maybe that's what playing the game means, in a positive sense. Playing the game in order to get myself ahead has really helped me. So I think, you do need soft skills. You might work hard, you might work twice as hard, but you might be passed over only because you're doing what you perceive is right, not what your boss may want or what your company actually needs. And that's a weird one to get your head across. But once you take the feedback, once you speak to people and always do that continuous loop of feedback, then you can understand if you're putting your efforts in the right place.
Thank you, Darren. Don't know, Gavin, you've got anything to add to that? We've got some questions coming in, but have you got anything to add to what Anji and Darren said?
No, I mean, I think, to be honest, I agree. And I think that some of the questions are asking for personal experience. And again, I'll just give you an example. I mean, certainly when I made the transition to leadership, which was a big change for me, I had to think very carefully about what it is that I was lacking, and how I'd make that transition successful. Because the things that got me to the point of making that transition weren't necessarily going to be things that would make me successful in that role. And I was a very good sole distribution person managing a very, very small team. But when my role changed, the expectation of me was different. And if I just carried on doing the same thing and working incredibly hard, firstly, I would have burnt out. And secondly, I would have failed in my role. So I absolutely agree with the comments that have been made. Working hard will get you so far. And don't get us wrong, we are certainly encouraging people to work hard. But don't let that be the only thing. Do think more strategically longer term about the position that you're now in, certainly what the organisation wants, but also is it from you, where do you want your career to go and how do you get there?
Mm-hmm. So I thought it's probably a good opportunity. We've got a few more questions that I have, particularly on pay and recognition and microaggressions. But I want to touch on a point that Darren mentioned around the relationship with your boss. And we've had a question in really talking about your boss's expectations and, what if you never get that guidance or the constructive feedback from your boss that you actually need to develop and need to grow. I'll probably direct that one to Darren because he did speak about that in his answer.
Yes. So you're saying that's basically saying you don't have a good relationship with your boss. Is that what you're asking? You don't have a good relationship with your boss. You're not able to get the feedback. How do you move forward? Is that the question? Is that what he's asking? Can you hear me? Okay, I'm going to assume that's what you're asking. I think relationships are really, really important, and it's happened to me in my career where, I had a boss that I didn't get along with, but wanted to advance in the business that I was in, and of what I did there, I was young, so it was hard for me to find the right formula. But I did understand that I needed to build allies within the organization, not with just my boss, but also without undermining my boss, which is a key political mistake that people must not make. So I went and tried to meet with supervisors, and I tried to actually speak to people that my boss, that used to work for my boss, to understand what made my boss tick. How can I, get them on side? How can I, again, make them look good? What can I do to make sure that they can support me? Because a boss is supposed to be a cheerleader. And, this particular boss, I used to go to meetings, I used to answer all the questions, I used to, show how much deep knowledge I had of the firm. And, I clearly knew my stuff. And, she made, every time I sent an email as a female boss, she made sure to put her name on it. So I didn't get any recognition, and also all this good work that I was doing. I wanted to be promoted. I want people to see what my talents were. But for me, my perception was she was hiding my talents away, and she wants to take credit for my work, But I had to help to lead the transformation. I had to own the problem. I had to take my share of responsibility for the relationship. And I had to remember that, every boss wants to succeed in their role. So it's seldom personal, right? They want to succeed in their role. So I started to try and look for similarities between myself and my boss. What do they like? What do they don't like? Can I find some common ground with them so that they can help me, support me? I used to ask myself, are there reasonable explanations for their behavior? Rather than just assume that their behavior was always negative towards me. I tried to just get tips. When I spoke to other people that worked for that boss, I tried to understand how I could earn her trust, because I felt that maybe trust was an issue. I didn't know why, but I just felt it was, and maybe it's because of her own issues. So I really dug into the boss, tried to understand them, what irritates them, personal facts about them, and I started to try and have conversations with the boss. I actually asked the boss out for lunch, and I actually paid for the lunch, which is always my go-to maneuver, which seems to work quite well. I found out about her birthdays, her kids, and when you find out information about your boss, make sure you don't find out too much, only good stuff. So I found out from one person I spoke to that this boss was an alcoholic. That's not a good thing to find out, but I didn't bring that up in my conversations with my boss. But what happened with that was that I did build trust back up with that boss. I did start to be supported. She started cheering for me. Once I explained to her, once we got close enough and I could explain to her that, look, I don't know why you don't, I did start to be supported. She started cheering for me. Once I explained to her, once we got close enough and I could explain to her that, look, I don't know why you don't invite me to meetings. She didn't invite me to certain meetings as well. And once I was able to start saying to her, you don't invite me to meetings when you're talking to the big boss. And she was like, oh, actually, it's because I think one-to-one meetings are more effective. And I believe she was genuine. She just felt that it was more effective to have a one-to-one meeting, not that she was cutting me out, which was excellent for me, because then I felt like, oh, this is really not personal. And it kind of made me feel a lot better. And once I had that discussion with her at the right level, having spent the time building a good relationship with her, then, I was supported, and I did go on to be promoted in that organization, I think 3 times at the time. So I guess, I don't know if that's helpful, but that's, I guess, my response.
No, thank you. There's a question that's coming from Tori, which I think we need to cover, and that's around family trauma. How do you go about dealing with that in the office, and how do you stop that from affecting the way you work? Gavin, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So I think what Tori's asking is, I presume, that you've had a personal issue, family related, and how do you deal with that and manage your workload at the same time? I presume that's the base of the question. So yeah, I mean, I think so here you have to make an assessment about what's most important. And in this scenario, and I went through something, had a family bereavement last year, which was really, really tough. In that scenario, your mental, emotional well-being and your family are the most important thing. And I know it can feel like, we put on this brave face and this mask that we need to keep delivering despite the odds, but actually your well-being is more important than your job in that instance. But at the same time, you still need to manage your job and your career. And the best advice I could say is to be open with your company, ideally your manager, and make an assessment over what you need to do to manage the situation. So if you feel that actually being in the office or virtual office now will help you get through things, then manage that expectation with your boss. But at the same time, be kind to yourself and make sure that you don't just carry on with the routine that you had before, because you want a distraction. But knowing what they went through, you're not going to be able to perform at the same standard as before, at least for a while. If you feel you need some time away from the office, which is the other end of the spectrum, then again, I would discuss that with your company and with your boss. And to be honest, there is something called compassionate leave, which most companies have in a HR policy, which you should be able to utilize. To be honest, you shouldn't really have to be quoting HR policies. Most companies will realize that if you've had a family trauma, which it sounds like, or you have, or someone close to you has had, then the right thing to do will be to give you some time off and some leeway. I'd also suggest that you seek some counselling if necessary. And I know that might sound like it's quite dramatic, but if it's as difficult a situation I had last year, these things can affect you for a long time. And it may be that you think you're ready to go back to work and start performing at your previous level, but you're not. So please don't be afraid to seek some professional help if you need it, and take as much time as you need. From a work perspective, again, manage expectations. So if you do need to come back to work, again, it is what level am I operating at, and how much can I deliver in the time that I come back? So
Okay.
Darren, I think go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and just say, great advice that you gave from a management perspective. Again, when I've had incidents in the past where colleagues or people that I'm responsible for have had bereavements, my personal mantra is always family first. So I'm very much, and I hope most managers are like this, to allow their staff to take time off. Typically, I'm very blessed to have a high performing team, and I would hope if you're a high performing individual, you've got absolutely nothing to worry about. Okay. Now, even if you're not a high performing individual, the company has to give you compassionate leave, et cetera, and your boss should be reasonable with you. But clearly, if you go into an organization, you work hard, something bad happens in your life, the company is going to support you as much as possible. Just, all I'll say is don't be that person that, expects everything, and expects everything from the business. And then when something bad happens, you expect the business to bend over backwards for you, because sometimes that's not how it happens. So the best, safest place for you is to perform, do what's asked of you, do what's expected of you. And should anything in your life negative happen, then your business will 100% or should 100% support you. That's what I'll say.
Obviously Justin's
and
kind of going
I'm
through
this one as well.
Oh, okay.
Go on.
No, I was going to say Justin's obviously.
Dennis, I'm
Oh,
add
go on,
one, so
go for it.
Okay. So I was going to say, so I have 3 children, and my middle child actually suffers from a disability. So there's obviously the bereavement type of situations that happen. But you may have a lifelong, commitment to your family that is going to require your workplace to be flexible. So having a physically disabled child, we have a lot of hospital appointments. And the way I approach it with my firm is just full transparency. Also, I ask them for direction on expectation. We reached agreement around flexibility together. So, we sat at that table, and I've done this at every workplace. My daughter's now 17. So I've had to navigate through this throughout my career. And I think the one thing that I think has led me to be successful in these negotiations and navigating my career has been full transparency with my boss and HR in the workplace, being very clear about what I can do and when, what I need from them, and how I can excel in my career and continue to add impact with their support. And I think, sitting at the table and having those discussions about any commitment in your life to do with your family, really agree with Darren and Gavin, your family comes first and you have to be kind to yourself. But I think to make sure that everyone knows the direction of travel and is on the same page is really good to just sit down and have a very open forum discussion, so that nobody is surprised when you may need to be out of the office and you may need to navigate work-life balance around your personal commitments.
Thanks, Anji. So I thought we should move on to pay now, because pay is obviously quite important, and it hasn't really come up in many of the questions that I can see quite interesting. But clearly, pay rises are a key part of progression in every organisation. And I suppose in my own career, almost every bit being.
Justin, we can hardly hear you.
Yeah, we can hardly. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
So what tips would you give to somebody who feels that they're underpaid? And I'll probably Darren.
Did you say Darren? Did you say Darren? Do you think?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll quickly go into this. So
Darren, around pay.
Okay. Okay, so pay rises, very interesting subject. I think I normally say there's three things that you should do when trying to ask for a pay rise. I think the first is, go and find out what your industry rate is, which is an obvious one. Go and find out what your market rate is, get good examples. Look at your performance, or maybe find hard data to back up your performance, or better still, outperformance. Very important. And also, one of the things that kind of gripes me as well when people ask for pay rises is they're always looking at their. Actually, maybe before I get there, the third thing is, I guess, promotion relative to pay. So understand how much does promotion make up of any pay award, and how can you get more in general. Understand all of that. Then the point that gripes me is really about the people that normally find themselves underpaid generally don't have a career plan. And what I mean by that is that you're looking at your pace relative. You're looking at your pay, your today's rate relative to a static reference. So you're looking at what the guy next to you is getting today, and what you really should be doing is looking at how do you get paid more tomorrow and the day after. You need to work towards gaining more responsibility, and the money will follow. Who is writing the checks? How do you get that job? Because the person writing the checks is certainly paying themselves the right number, as I like to put it. You need to really, when you're looking for a pay rise, you need to have the emotional intelligence to understand that what you think, again, going back to what I said earlier, is good work. What you think is good, what you think deserves you a pay rise, doesn't matter, because what actually matters is what your boss thinks, and what your boss thinks is good work, and what your boss thinks deserves a pay rise. So definitely don't get it twisted, so to speak. That you need to be really aware of that. You need to have confidence to talk to your boss as well. So I talk about these three things, but you need to go and talk to your boss, but you have to always back it up with hard facts. Managers like results, and depending on what industry you're in, they'll like to see the numbers, they'll like to see what you've done, they'll like to see the evidence of it. And most firms there will give you, will look into what you're saying, and most, if you're a good performer, you are hopefully will be successful in what you're asking for. So that's what I'd say.
Yeah, I can add to that too, Darren. So I manage a team of 30 now, and I think Darren's very right in saying, you have to compare the people on your team, and if you have a high performing team, that's a lot of people that you need to navigate salaries for, promotions, bonus increases, so on and so forth. So I think, we look at, in my organization, and pay is definitely based not just on your current impact and skills and what you bring to the table, but your potential. And potential is informed by a number of things. It's, the stretch opportunities and your performance there, how involved you get in the extracurricular activities that we spoke about earlier in the firm. So, networks, organizations, the charitable organizations we may have, and really becoming a culture carrier for the firm. We use that term a lot in my organization. It really means, embodying the positive attributes of the firm and becoming somebody that is almost an advocate, ambassador for that firm. And that doesn't mean that this kind of static culture that we have, our culture is something we try to evolve continuously. So we do want people to challenge the status quo. So people who bring that passion and potential to the table, and are challenging myself, the organization, to think differently. The only thing I will say, and I've seen questions about, when do you start speaking up? Is it when you're junior or senior? You have to be comfortable, and it takes a lot sometimes to speak up. And I know that early on in my career, I did a lot less of it, and it was indirect. I think it depends on your manager, how much they ask you for your opinions and your thoughts. I don't think there's anything wrong that when you're having one-on-one conversations with your manager, you should not say, I've had this great idea, look at this data, I would love for you to consider X, Y, and Z, and be specific in, your feedback to your manager about the firm, about them, about the, your role within the team. I think it's hard for managers to sometimes keep an eye on every single individual, and you have to be that communicator to your manager sometimes to know, not just around pay, but your career and how you're going to navigate your career within that person's team and then the broader firm.
Yeah, and can I also add that, and just give you the other side of this, because I think, again, Anji and Darren are absolutely right. But on one hand, make sure that you're not, make sure you haven't got tickets on yourself. Make sure that you're not actually, I should be paid X, when actually, you're performing at a level which means you're paid Y. So like really and it's not just your opinion. You need an outside perspective, be it a peer, a colleague, the market, to assess whether you're being paid at the right level. If you genuinely after that feel that you're not being paid, and you've had a good constructive conversation, don't be afraid to think, actually, I know what my worth is, and ask the question of, right, how do I get there? Because it may well be that it's not going to happen this year and you have to take a longer term view. So it's okay to say, look, I want to be operating at this level, and what does it take? At least in that scenario, then your boss is going to have an honest conversation with you, and then he'll either say, you know what, that ain't going to happen, and then at least you know where you stand, or it'll be, okay, fine, deliver A, B, C, D, and then we can have a discussion about it. Because it may not, you might be lucky, or you might be fortunate that your boss says, actually, you know what, you really are underpaid and here's an immediate pay rise. It rarely works that way. So you need to think about, how do I actually implement a plan myself to make that happen?
And I know Justin's finding it difficult to be on. Are you on, Justin? If not, I can. I'm going to ask one question that's come in about this topic, Darren and Gavin, which is, the subject of promotion is obviously related to pay, but how much does having actual qualifications influence the promotion and pay? So things like MBAs, CFAs, and so on. Do you think it's necessary now? And maybe your own personal experiences, and I can add to that after you guys speak. So should I give that to Darren?
Yeah, I'm happy to go. So I would say you always have to continue developing in order to continue to be more valuable in your industry. Some industries you might be able to get away with not doing anything. Some industries, certainly or the financial services industry, depending on what vertical you're in, you will probably have to continue to study and develop yourself. Experience is worth a lot as well in some roles. In some roles, you don't necessarily need to do a professional qualification. You can get to senior levels with experience and a demonstration that you know the business, know the company, know the history, and know it well. But whatever happens, you can't stand still. You can't just do nothing. You have to do some form of development, whether that's you talking to your colleagues, learning what they're doing, how the business functions, whether that's doing a professional qualification, a CFA, a KAYA, IMC, MBA, a degree, whatever it is. You can't stand still. That's all I'll say. But you don't always need to have an MBA, because I don't have an MBA. My senior management team, I think at least 3 of them have MBAs. And I sit at the table with them and have strong debates with them about where to take our business in the future. So you don't have to have these qualifications. Obviously, it helps, like anything. It helps, but you can also demonstrate your value in other ways also. But I think a lot depends on your industry. If you're in the medical industry, you probably need qualifications. You're not going to get away with experience. But if you're in the financial industry, depending on the vertical, you can have good experience and be very effective.
Yes.
Thanks.
Hey.
Gavin, I'm going to take, just because we've only got 4 minutes, I just want to ask you a question on
Sorry,
microaggressions, because
Sure.
come up in the questions. So I know that, microaggressions is a topic that comes up a great deal in our mentoring circles. So Talk About Black does these mentoring circles, and one thing that just continuously comes up is microaggressions. So these are small, or not small, maybe more subtle ways of, it could be verbal or behavioral, that really suggests a kind of prejudice in the workplace, and makes people feel lesser than other individuals in the organization. So Gavin, I suppose the question to you is, do we call it out? Have you called it out? And if so, is it good for your career? And how should we deal with it in the workplace?
Yeah, so this is a thorny issue. I think the first thing to realize is that microaggressions exist. This is obviously an American term, but they do exist, and they have a really adverse effect on the mental well-being of the person who's subject to them. And I think there's some studies that says actually microaggressions are more harmful than overt aggressions, because you hear it and you try to figure out, well, is that what do they mean by that? Did I hear that right? Or you read a lot and you agonize over it, and they can be very, very regular. And it can really wear individuals down. The first thing I'd say actually though is, we've talked about managing everyone else but ourselves, and the most important and first thing you have to manage is yourself. So I'll give you an example. When Darren felt that his boss was cutting him out of the meeting with her boss, Darren could have easily felt, and he did at the time, think, why is she cutting me out? And it doesn't take much to then leap to the fact that, well, actually, maybe it's because, is it because I'm black, or is she slighting me because I'm a minority? It's very easy to make that leap. And actually, when he dug down and got to the reality of it, it had nothing to do with that at all. So the first thing I'd say is make sure you're managing yourself, because when you are a minority in the industry, it's very easy to feel that those things which go against you are somehow related to your race, ethnicity, or whatever diversifying characteristic that you have. And I know, because I will have and will continue to fall into that trap. So just make sure that you are managing yourself and really think about, could there be another reason for this? But we do know they exist, and let's not pretend that racism and microaggressions don't exist. I think the UK thinks that it's post-racial society. We're not. We just never dealt with it, so it's been swept under the carpet. I would do a number of things. The first thing I would do is speak to someone about it, because of the impact on your well-being. If you have someone you trust and can confide in the workplace, then great. But just know that, be careful what you're discussing, because if someone comes to me and says they think they're being the victim of something that looks racial, I, as particularly someone seen in the business, have a duty to report that. So what you really want is some advice about, I'm seeing it this way. Is this actually the case? Not, this person is doing this to me, because you need someone to bounce that. You need someone to bounce that off. That will also help you share the burden, because it can take a lot. It's a lot to take on by yourself. And if that's not appropriate, then speak to someone outside the office. The second thing is really to try and get to grips with what's actually happening. So again, I use Darren's situation with his boss. And I appreciate that this, what you're not doing is confronting the microaggression. It's actually that behavior which was exhibited, try to get to the bottom of it. And again, I refer to Anji and say that a direct conversation is always the best course of action, because otherwise it's down to you become subjective, and it's down to your own interpretation, and you're not managing yourself. And what you're doing is drawing a conclusion that something bad is happening and I'm a victim. So I'd really try to get to the source of it. If after all that you are convinced that there is that you're the victim of a microaggression, I would say that you need to think about taking that relatively seriously. And I would honestly, it's an issue in the workplace, and particularly if it's consistent. I would raise it. The key thing, therefore, with microaggressions is whether it was intentional or whether it's just someone's bias. I.e., are they behaving in a way where actually they are purposely trying to undermine you because of your, in this case, ethnicity, or it could be of your gender or your sexual orientation, or is it actually because it's banter, or they don't really realize what they're doing? So I would then, if you're going to report it, just say you are feeling this way, and maybe it's a cultural issue with the workplace, rather than it being actually pushing their button and saying that this is happening to me. If after all that you find that actually there really is an issue, then you need to protect yourself, and it's your right not to be subject to that in the workplace. And I would say deal with it accordingly, report it.
Angie, what do you
I know
think?
we're at time. I'm just going to say.
What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. So, one is, if you are suffering from microaggressions or some behavior in the workplace that is making you feel really uncomfortable, firstly, you have to decide what you want to do. Do you want to escalate? And then, as Gavin and Darren have outlined, raising it to either someone you trust or with your manager. I think once you go to your manager or HR, you are putting it into the realm of, I want this to be acknowledged, I want this to be dealt with, and I want there to be a process around this. So I think, if you are going to speak up about it, and I've definitely spoken up about these experiences myself in the past, but always with the intent that it was going to be documented and solved for. And that has been throughout my career. What I have learned is, and I go back to this point, perception is not the same as intention. And intention is sometimes, you mean to do it, and sometimes it's unconscious. And that comes back to biases, like unconscious biases or intention. You really want to do that. Sometimes I've experienced something and my perception has been my own experience of that situation, but the intent from the other person was not there. It was just innocent. And you kind of have to unwind that, and there's a lot of apologies, but you get to a good place. That person learned something around how they made you feel. Now, on the reverse side, I've had situations where that person definitely meant to cause offense, and it has been dealt with, and I raised it and I wanted it acknowledged, and it was dealt with, through a process. So I do think one thing I don't agree with is if it continues for you to stay silent. I think if this is consistent and constant, and it's causing you, real grief to feel uncomfortable in the workplace, coming into work, or staying up in the evenings, and so on and so forth. I think you need to raise it. So I think that's my advice is be very intentional about what you want the outcome to be, and then you can seek the right route. So it might be, as Gavin said, going to somebody you trust. But if you feel that you want to escalate this and there'll be a process around it, then going to your manager and so on. And I know we're at time and Justin's not on. And there's just one thing I wanted to raise, and there was a comment that was raised. I was speaking to somebody, thanks to Darren, from the NHS today, and we found a lot of commonalities of experiences around what we've discussed today, both in the private and public sector. And I was shocked to see how many similarities. So if we ever get time for another session like that, like this, it'd be great to talk about that as well. But I think it's not as different as maybe think.
I
don't know if Dennis is on.
Yes, I am here.
Oh, go on, Darren.
I was. Are we finished? If we finished, then
if you got one more point to make, we can. We're at the end of the day, so.
I was just on the microaggressions because it's very interesting. This particular point, and I certainly have had it so much growing up in the industry, unfortunately. And to Anji's point, if you're getting it persistently, you must do something about it. And I was going to say pick your battles, but pick your battles with people that are consistently doing it, absolutely. But it's quite draining to have to, fight everyone that does a microaggression, because unfortunately there's too many people that do it, and it'll just be mentally draining. So of course, if people are doing this and continue to do it, then absolutely you should take that up. But tackling a microaggression can be quite empowering as well. It has been for me in the past, where people have said things, and I think what do we call it? They call it a micro intervention strategy now, which is what Gavin was outlining to you guys, how to deal with it. How I've dealt with it in the past is, I try and think about what do I want out of that intervention? Do I want to be heard, or do I want to educate someone about something? So normally the first question I always ask is to clarify what you mean. As soon as you ask that question, all sorts of hell breaks loose, right? Because normally at that point, someone thinks about what's happened and thinks, oh, I get it. I didn't mean it. They try and dumb it down and it's done. And it doesn't happen again, and they know not to do it again, typically. But also, when you do respond, you've got to try and separate intent from impacts, which I think Anji and Gavin both touched on. So for example, when you respond, it's like, I don't know what you mean. Did you know what you meant by saying this? Did you realize that it meant this, or whatever it is? I think that's quite important when you're going in to have a discussion with someone. But 99.9% of the time, it's non-deliberate. It's just off the cuff remark, didn't think about it, didn't think about connotations, didn't think about what it might mean. And normally you get an apology straight away. But as I'm saying, pick your battles. It's a difficult thing to actually say, because it happens too much. And I worry about people's mental health for continuing to talk about it, to say it all the time, challenge it. And also I worry about, your perception in that workplace. And I know this is a very complex topic, but I think if people are persistently doing this, you must call them out. That's standard. And I think you call them out first to themselves. So you have to give them an opportunity. And then if they don't react to what you've said, of course, as Anji said, as Gavin has said, you go to HR and you have to escalate it. It's in your rights to do so.
And I suppose, Darren and Gavin, one thing is, you might have to do more education than for those people who are unintentionally making these remarks than you thought you would ever have to do in the workplace. And it's not your job to educate people, but sharing your experiences and how this shows up to you, and then educating those people around you, that is some of what you may need to do. But yeah, completely agree with what was said. Gavin, did you want to add anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not fair that this falls on you to change the perception or viewpoint of somebody else. And it is mentally draining. But I agree with Darren that typically when you do speak to someone about it, most of the time they don't realize what they said. But I also think about, and what sustains me is, okay, they're doing it to me and I'm, maybe I can deal with it and overlook it, but actually they might do it to someone who can't deal with it as well, or is more vulnerable. And if the responsibility is not just to my self, it's to these other people. So I know that means that if you have to deal with it, you're taking on a lot, but also know that one conversation can also change a behavior, which will impact probably more than just you. So if you are that person who's answered those questions and having to deal with it, you're not alone. And we do appreciate you taking this stuff on. It matters.
Great. So I know, Dennis, we've gone over by about 10 minutes. So, I think the whole panel is, thank you for having to talk about Black at the session today. And, if there's any